This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the Dell XPS 17 9710. So what does that mean? Well, it's the second generation of the XPS 17, a relatively new addition to Dell's XPS lineup for those of you who want a big 17.3-inch screen instead of the, well, 15.6-inch screen on the XPS 15. So for content creators, media consumption, maybe even a little bit of gaming, because you can get this with an RTX 3050 or NVIDIA RTX 3060 dedicated GPU inside, along with Intel 11th generation CPUs. We're going to look at it now. So the chassis design hasn't changed, which isn't surprising. This is only the second generation version of this, and that's fine because people love the XPS look, right? Nice, rigid. Boy, is this thing rigid. CNC aluminum unibody design with that carbon fiber interior. And we have a 16:10 aspect ratio display. You have two display options. Now you have the full HD plus because it's 16:10, so a little bit bigger than the usual, you get the plus part there. And then there's a 4K wide gamut option, which is IPS and made by Sharp, that display. And that one is a touch screen. So if you want touch, you have to go with 4K. That adds about $200, the difference between going for the full HD or the 4K model. I think a lot of people are going to be tempted by that 4K. Not that the full HD is bad, but if you want touch and you want the ultimate wow and color accuracy and prettiness, you've got it there. Both displays are 500 nits and low blue light, easier on your eyes. We have Intel 11th generation CPUs here, and as usual with Dell, because they make everything in a vast array of configurations, they can start with a low selling price. You can start with a Core i5 on this and Intel 11th gen, or you can go into Core i7 and even Core i9 CPUs. We have the Core i7 CPU, the 11800H. These are H45-watt processors. The Core i5 is where it starts, and that's the model probably nobody wants to buy so much because it might be affordable, right, for $1,550, but that gives you a Core i5 and no DGPU. So every other model but that base model will have a dedicated graphics processor inside, which is what you want. So realistically speaking, it starts to look sweet around $2,000. That gets you an i7, 60 gigs of RAM, a 512 gig NVMe SSD, the full HD plus display, and an RTX 3050. Ours is not totally maxed out. We don't have the Core i9 option, but we do have that Core i7, like I said. We have 32 gigs of RAM and a terabyte SSD and the RTX 3060 and the 4K plus resolution touchscreen. And that one's around $2,650 right now. So cheap, it's not, but its competitors are pretty much the Razer Blade 17, which sure ain't cheap either, and the 16-inch M1 MacBook Pro, and also, not cheap. So these are premium, high-end, expensive laptops. Let's put it that way. As it goes, it's actually fairly price competitive in that respect. The speakers on this are quite good. You got 4 speakers, 2 tweeters, 2 woofers, up firing beside the keyboard, which is why you don't have a number pad. You've got the space used by the speakers. I think it's worthwhile. You have a beautiful display that is fantastic for watching streaming media, and you have some audio that's right getting up there with Mac level quality. Nice, loud, doesn't distort, clarity in the highs, a nice oomph in the lows. It's good stuff there. They did a good job. A keyboard that they surround is pretty good. Dell does low travel keyboards, but this one has a nice, crisp, tactile feel with good key return. It doesn't feel as abrupt and punishing on your finger joints as the XPS 13 does. I got a little more room in the chassis with this one, right? So even if it is still fairly thin. The trackpad is big and sort of Mac-like. It's Microsoft Precision, and it's not bad. I find that when doing like click dragging, sometimes it doesn't. It thinks I've lifted up before that I have. I don't know. It was there that way with the last generation. One thing we don't have from the last generation is that problem with sometimes a loose or jiggly trackpad. That was a QA issue. Dell fixed that. So bye-bye. Not a problem anymore. For biometrics, you have a Windows Hello IR camera and a fingerprint scanner in the power button as well. Now, well, what about performance, right? I mean, we have H-series CPU, not so different from any gaming laptop in that respect, going all the way up to, like I said, Core i9 if you want. Then we have the Core i7. And you've had pretty decent, it's the lower end of the upper range of NVIDIA's DGPUs, right? It's not 3070 or 3080, but a 3060 is pretty decent and actually can get you a little bit of ray tracing, and the 3050 is not too bad. Well, this is a laptop for content creators. That's the idea. Or people, a lot of money who consume content too. It's not a gaming laptop. It's not as thick. It's not as heavy. The thermals on this, well, Dell actually will let you push this. They're not limiting the CPU thermals on this. If you're doing heavy-duty benchmarks or really pushing it hard with 3D renders or something like that, you can max out the core temperatures for the CPU at near 100 degrees centigrade. But it gets loud, but not super duper loud, but you'll hear it working. So it's ready to perform for you, but it's not the kind of machine I would feel comfortable playing Apex Legends for 6 hours on. I think that a gaming laptop purpose-built for that still makes more sense. This is a thin and white mobile workstation sort of thing. That said, it does do Far Cry 6 just fine. At full HD resolution, you can get 70 frames per second on ultra settings. So it does got games. So if you're going to travel and you want some gaming when you do have to travel, yeah, that's exactly the sort of use it's perfect for. All right, so things are looking pretty good on the outside of the XPS 17. How about the inside? How about the cooling and the expandability and all that stuff? To take off the bottom cover, it's Torx T5 screws and use a guitar pick or pry tool near the front edges to get off this cover. Be warned, XPS covers, the bottom edges here are sharp, so you can cut yourself, so be careful with that. And here we have the internal. So we have a vapor chamber in here. Well, no wonder that it does help it run not too loud and not too burning hot. And in fact, they use Gore or Gore-Tex insulation so that the bottom surface doesn't get quite as hot when it sits on your lap. In fact, it isn't burning hot under most cases. Pretty big fans over here too. The cooling system really has grown up here, and of course they have more room to grow versus the XPS 15. We have 2 RAM slots. This is a wonderful thing to see. So DDR4 3200 megahertz RAM. You can get this with anything from 8 to 64 gigs of dual channel RAM, or of course upgrade it yourself after the fact if you wish to do that. And it has 2 M.2 SSD slots. It is PCIe 4 compliant. You can get it with PCIe 3 or 4 drives. And as you can see here, one drive supports SATA and PCIe, and the other one is PCIe only. The Wi-Fi card is soldered on board over here, so you won't be changing that, but it's a good killer AX1650 card, so it's Wi-Fi 6. It's okay. And pretty good speaker woofer here. The woofers fire down, the tweeters fire up, which makes sense sonically. And the big 97 watt-hour battery taking up most of the space towards the front of the chassis. So ports on this is where you have to say, ha, Apple messed with everybody, right? So Dell with the XPS line has always kind of been following Apple's lead. They went all USB-C, Thunderbolt, in this case Thunderbolt 4. You got 4 of those ports. One will be used by the charger. And no legacy ports. You do have a full-size SD card slot, yay that, and of course a headphone jack on board. So it will be dongle life, but you do get a little dongle in the box that gives you HDMI 2.0 and a USB-A connector at least, so you don't have to go and source your own immediately. That helps, but that is an annoyance. They wanted to make it so thin, 19.5 millimeters, so there's not even room for a barrel pin charging connector. So Dell did their own re-engineering of the USB-C charging spec, which should top out at 100 watts, and they're doing 130 watts. Speaking of that, if you are going full bore on this machine, there is a possibility that the charge level will drop even while it's plugged in. They say if you are playing Far Cry 6, or you are doing Blender renders, or heavy-duty Premiere 4K exports, not a lot, but say 5% an hour. So that's normal standard operating procedure, Dell says, basically for that, because your CPU and your GPU alone can consume quite a lot of wattage. I mean, you're looking at 65 to 70 watts with the 3050 or 3060 GPU on board, 45 watt plus jumping above 45 watt for the CPU, and then you have to power everything else. When it comes to battery life, I would say if you care about battery life, get the full HD display, because the 4K really does hit the battery life on this. And also the fact that these displays can go to 500 nits means you can also tank your battery life more easily. But keeping the display at 200 nits with our 4K display, I averaged about 6 hours of light productivity work and some streaming video. If I threw in things like some Adobe Premiere or Photoshop, batch editing a bunch of files in Lightroom, that sort of thing, then even less. So the 4K is no Energizer Bunny. And there, obviously the 16-inch MacBook Pro still takes the lead on that. But compared to the Razer Blade 17, it's not doing too bad, right? Or most gaming laptops. Unless you're talking Ryzen gaming laptops. I mean, that's sort of a different market. For those of you who are thinking about a gaming laptop as well, and you do care about battery life, you could look at some of the Ryzen options like the Lenovo Legion 5 Pro or the Asus ROG G15 Zephyrus or even the Strix, depending on how much horsepower you want, but a different look, a different thickness, a different aesthetic there. So I leave that up to you. So that's the Dell XPS 17, almost unique in its class because you don't see many 17-inch sexy high-end premium mobile workstations, do you? I mean, like I said, Razer Blade, 16-inch MacBook Pro, those are the direct competitors, and that is about it. So if you're looking for that real big screen, a lot of performance, and this machine will not put the brakes on, they really let it fly, then you've got it there. And the usual caveats would be not the best battery life, particularly with the 4K display, a bit of dongle life going on since we're talking only USB-C Thunderbolt 4 ports. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.